If this had happened to a Democratic justice, a Democratic appointed justice, and it had been a Republican gunman who was loitering outside that justice's house with a gun in his backpack and zip ties and a knife and pepper spray and full preparations to kill that justice and his or her family, you can imagine that it would not just be the top news of every major news network. It would be the top news for weeks on end because it would all be chalked up to the evils of Republican rhetoric and the fiery oratory of people on Fox News. It would be chalked up to shows like this one. It would be chalked up to every Republican politician. Every single Republican politician in America would be asked about the increase in the temperature of the rhetoric that had led to this awful point in American life. We know that's true because after January 6th, the idea is that every Republican everywhere is answerable for a couple of hundred idiots going into the Capitol building and doing violence to police officers and then promptly being arrested. The idea is that we are all collectively guilty when somebody does a thing. When a white supremacist shooter murders a bunch of black people in Buffalo, New York, the entire Republican infrastructure is responsible. Fox News and Tucker Carlson are responsible. Candace Owens and I are somehow responsible for all of this sort of stuff. That is the rhetoric of the left. Whenever a bad thing happens, and that bad thing is even remotely connectable, even if it is not logically supportable, if you can connect it at the most tenuous level to some sort of broader right-wing thought, then we have to have a conversation about conservatism in this country. We have to have a conversation about the evils of the right in this country. Well, yesterday, a man was arrested outside the house of Justice Brett Kavanaugh. He was arrested because he was fully intending to kill Justice Brett Kavanaugh, and he was armed and ready to do so. The only reason that he did not carry out his plan is because there was armed security outside Justice Brett Kavanaugh's house. Yet another reminder that armed security is a good thing wherever you have vulnerable people. I know some people have trouble with that when it comes to, for example, schools, but the simple fact is that if there had not been armed security at Brett Kavanaugh's house, then this person probably would have killed somebody. According to the New York Times, a man armed with a pistol, a knife, and other weapons was arrested near the Maryland home of Justice Brett Kavanaugh early Wednesday after he said he traveled from California to kill the Supreme Court justice, according to federal officials. This particular offender, and again, I don't mention the names of people who are seeking attention like this on this show, unlike most other legacy media outlets, which spend inordinate time blowing up the name, picture, and profile of political terrorists in order to presumably create copycats, or at least without regard as to whether they create copycats. We don't mention the names of people like this on this particular show. He was charged with attempted murder after 2 U.S. deputy marshals saw him step out of a taxi cab in front of the justice's house in Chevy Chase, Maryland, early on Wednesday morning, according to federal prosecutors. This particular attempted murderer was dressed in black, carrying a suitcase and a backpack, according to a federal affidavit. Inside the suitcase and backpack, the authorities discovered a black tactical chest rig and tactical knife, a pistol with 2 magazines and ammo, pepper spray, zip ties, a hammer, a screwdriver, a nail punch, a crowbar, a pistol light, and duct tape, in addition to other items, according to the affidavit. According to the affidavit, his plan was to break into the house, kill the justice, and then kill himself. And his motives are perfectly clear. His motives are perfectly clear because he told the police his motives. He said he was upset about the recent school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, which, by the way, that is definitely the proper solution. You're upset about a mass school shooting, so your plan is to kill a justice and maybe members of his family if they stumble upon you. He was also upset about a leaked draft of a Supreme Court opinion suggesting the justices were poised to overturn Roe versus Wade, the landmark 1973 pro-abortion decision by the Supreme Court. Now, we said at the time that leaking prospective Supreme Court draft decisions is extremely dangerous. I said this at the time. I said the day this happened, it put justices' lives in danger because before that decision is actually released, that means that the vote is not actually official. And so if you are a crazy person and you wish to shape the course of future American history, maybe you try to kill one of the justices. I said it was actually a sin for Justice Roberts not to, upon the leak, immediately release the decision as the majority decision because it would create incentive for evil and or crazy people to go and try to kill a justice in the majority in order to change the course of judicial history. I said it at the time. And there were protests immediately upon the leak at Justice Kavanaugh's house, you'll recall, and the home of the other justices. Apparently, according to this particular suspect, he indicated he believed that the justice he intended to kill would side with Second Amendment decisions that would loosen gun control laws. So this guy is from California, which has extraordinarily strict gun controls, transported a gun across state lines to Justice Kavanaugh's house, and then proceeded to attempt to kill the justice in order to promote gun control, which means this will be out of the headlines before it even begins. In fact, it was pretty much out of the headlines immediately. Again, this was not played as the top story by the mainstream media last night. It was not. There were other stories to cover, like the House passing a doomed gun control bill, or the appearance of Joe Biden on Jimmy Kimmel. These were major stories. But the attempted murder of a Supreme Court justice by a left-wing radical spouting ideologically indistinguishable ideas from those of mainstream leftists, that Brett Kavanaugh is responsible for the end of abortion in the country, that Brett Kavanaugh is a gun nut, all the rest of this, that was just not a headline. In fact, the New York Times online front page, as of yesterday afternoon, did not have this story on it. There were 16 stories on their front page, and this was not on it. So the New York Times reported it. They just kind of buried it. In fact, if you look the very next morning at this story is not above the fold on the page. It is really not below the fold on the page. Okay, this story appears in a tiny little area of the, I'm going to count the number of stories real fast that are above this story on the New York Times online website front page. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38. There are 38 stories above this story. Counting that in real time. As of this show, there are 38 stories, 38 above this story on the New York Times homepage. You want to know why? The answer is because this person is a left-winger who's attempting to murder a Supreme Court justice. If this person had been a right-winger attempting to murder a Supreme Court justice, we have weeks of conversation in the legacy media about the evils of America and white supremacy and conservatism and all the rest of the things that the media like to lump together as the Republican Party agenda. Officers from Montgomery County Police Department arrived and found the shooter on the phone with the communication center. Apparently, he called the cops and got himself arrested after he realized that he was not going to succeed in his attempt to kill Kavanaugh. He was taken into custody without incident. If convicted, he could face up to 20 years in prison. He told police he had begun thinking about how to give his life a purpose and decided to kill a Supreme Court justice after finding the justice's address online. Why? Who could have been revealing the justice's address online? Who would have been doing that? Oh, you mean the activist groups who said that you should gather outside Justice Kavanaugh's house? Prompted, motivated, and cheered by members of the Democratic Party and some members of the media? Lest you think that this is an exaggeration, let me remind you that this is precisely what many on the Democratic side said. Hey, Jen Psaki, for example, was asked just a couple of weeks ago about protesters outside justices' homes, and she could not find it in her heart to condemn it.
There are voices on the right who have called out this protests that are happening while remaining silent for years on protests that have happened outside of the homes of school board members, the Michigan Secretary of State, or including threats made to women seeking reproductive health care, or even an insurrection against our Capitol. So I know that there's an outrage right now, I guess, about protests that have been peaceful to date, and we certainly continue to encourage that outside of judges' homes, and that's the president's position. But the silence is pretty deafening about all of the other intimidation that we've seen to a number of people.
I've said every single time people protest outside of somebody's house, I've said that that is wrong because that is somebody's house. Okay, but put that aside. That was the White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, before she just moved right on over to the propaganda wing of the White House, MSNBC. There she was, literally saying that the president encourages protest at the homes of justices, which, by the way, does in fact violate local law. You are not allowed to go to people's houses where Justice Kavanaugh lives and then try to intimidate justices into changing their positions. And there's a case that's obstruction of justice on a federal level, that if you try to change a justice's decision through threats or intimidation, that you got a problem. Again, that was Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, couldn't bring herself to condemn people protesting outside the homes of justices. I mean, a year ago, in 2020, in the middle of a pro-abortion rally, Chuck Schumer, the current Senate Majority Leader, he actually threatened Brett Kavanaugh with consequences. Those consequences were unclear. I'm not suggesting that Chuck Schumer thinks that Justice Brett Kavanaugh should be murdered. What I'm saying is that his rhetoric here is about as vague as Donald Trump's rhetoric on January 6th. We are told that that rhetoric inspired the rioting at the Capitol and the invasion of the Capitol building, and that was incitement to violence. Okay, so I don't believe that was technical incitement. I think it was raising the temperature to a dangerous level and bad things happen. I feel the same way about Chuck Schumer here. Here's Chuck Schumer.
I want to tell you, Gorsuch, I want to tell you, Kavanaugh, you have released the whirlwind and you will pay the price. You won't know what hit you if you go forward with these awful decisions.
Yeah, I'm sure he meant this politically, but I'm also sure that Donald Trump meant politically that there should be peaceful protest at the Capitol building, because he literally said there should be peaceful protest at the Capitol building. So just to get this straight, we're about to have a massive telethon today with Democrats claiming that Donald Trump is solely and completely responsible for a bunch of morons running into the Capitol building with violence on their mind in an attempt to hold up the workings of the United States Senate in certifying the election of 2020. But Chuck Schumer says you won't know what hit you. You're going to reap the whirlwind, Justice Kavanaugh. And then a guy shows up outside Kavanaugh's house to murder him. We're supposed to believe there's no connection whatsoever. And one of these things is totally fine. The other thing is totally horrible. Which is it? If people get blamed for raising the rhetoric, and that rhetoric raising, the heat of that rhetoric, ends up making life more dangerous, that rule does not only apply to one side. By the way, Chuck Schumer, like a week ago, was saying that he was happy that people were protesting outside the homes of justices.
Are you comfortable with the protests that we saw outside the homes of Supreme Court justices over the weekend?
If protests are peaceful, yes. My house there's protests 3-4 times a week outside my house. That's the American way to peacefully protest is okay. And that's my wife, sorry. Maybe there's a protest outside.
If it's peaceful, it's totally fine. Well, once again, if the mark of it's okay to say it is say peaceful protest and then everything is fine, then not sure what you're bitching about Trump for, considering that Trump literally said peaceful protest outside the Capitol. Now, I've said before, I think that Donald Trump raised the rhetoric on January 6th. I think that he said a lot of things that were false between November 4th and January 6th that raised the prospect of bad things happening. But the same thing is true here. If you say go protest outside a justice's home, when again, protesting justices should not be a thing generally, considering they are lifetime appointees who are supposed to be insulated from the political process for purposes of interpreting, not manufacturing the Constitution of the United States, then I'm not sure how we're not supposed to make the connection. But the answer is we don't make the connection if we're the legacy media, because after all, this is a left-winger and these are left-wing people, and so we have to pretend that they are all good and wonderful and fine. Did you know that every single like creates one additional leftist tier? That is just science.